the movie, they say, oh, freedom of speech, they're attacking our freedom of speech. Okay, maybe if somebody else does it, it's okay. But if our own country, bans our movies and censors everything and hurts our freedom of speech, that's okay. You know what I mean? It's also interesting, is this war propaganda. Like, they try to, it's like total caricature of North Korea. Nothing is like what it actually looks like. If you were here earlier, you saw images of North Korea that I put up, right? That look totally different from what they portray North Korea as. They portray North Korea in the movie as being this barren wasteland with just forests and underdeveloped stuff with one gigantic palace where Kim Jong-un lives. And like a capital city of Pyongyang that's just, just fake fronts with like plastic fruit or whatever. That's not the case. But it's like they have no idea. Like, it's like they spent 10 minutes on Wikipedia and made a movie based on that. Yeah.
I just add to that, the biggest issue I think with the interview is like you said, the current political depiction of North Korea, and playing into that stereotype and reinforcing that same stereotype to people who don't actually know the truth. And the fact is that there isn't a lot of truth out there that's relevant and accessible to people, where people are going to go and actually research into actual procedures and the bureaucracy of North Korea.
Yeah.
It's reinforcing this really, really ignorant stereotype that's modernly relevant and dangerous.
Yeah, because for a country in reality, in actual, like, the situation right now is a small country of 24 million people trying to defend its borders against a gigantic superpower with nuclear weapons, way more than how many North Korea has, with warships and nuclear bombers flying around their country, 1 million soldiers on one side, or 600,000 troops on the South Korean side, pointing their guns and maneuvering and doing military exercises that simulate the invasion and destruction of North Korea. Like, literally, it's like somebody standing outside your house with a dummy that looks like you, or like with your picture pasted on it, and then shooting at it and say, oh, this is for self-defense, I'm just practicing. So practicing for what? Killing me, And then in the movie, they don't say any of that, and then they portray Kim Jong-un as, like, literally they say he's a modern day Hitler. And they say they're conducting nuclear tests on Pacific Islands outside of North Korea. They're blowing up this and they're threatening the world, and they're going to attack everybody because they want to prove how powerful they are, blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is coming from a country, the United States, that invades any country that, resists their kind of like economic will and political kind of domination. This is a country that funds terrorists to overthrow governments that aren't friendly to the United States. Syria, Libya, Iraq, all those other countries, right? And this is a country that in 1950 to 53 committed a genocide in Korea. Out of 9 million people in North Korea, they killed 3 million. That's a huge portion of the population. And they destroyed the country so much that there wasn't even like a single full building left standing. They just completely flattened the country. Right? And this is burned into the minds of the remaining North Koreans. The United States are genocidal imperialist, kind of like, warmongers that killed a huge portion of our population, as well as supporting a dictatorship in the South that carried out mass murders all over the country up until the 1990s. Right? The Jeju Island massacre, they killed almost everyone on the island because they were actually in support of the North, and they're anti-U.S. puppet kind of like government in the South. So, and some soldiers actually refused to go there, so the United States actually went in, took out those soldiers that they ordered that refused, and they brought in new soldiers to massacre the civilians on that island. They had a Bodo League massacre, which was in Seoul, in the capital of South Korea, where they rounded up anybody even suspected of being a communist or being pro-North or anti-South Korean government and U.S. occupation, and they shot them and threw their bodies into a ditch. There's pictures of that. I mean, I could show you, but bring that up later.
So what's interesting is that this history isn't, taken into account in the movie, and the actual, the reality that's going on isn't taken into account in the movie as well, because at one point, once the interview, it's called the interview, so eventually once the interview is conducted, Skylark or Franco talks to Kim Jong-un, they get into an argument. Finally, Franco says, it's like, why don't you feed your people? And so in response to this, Kim Jong-un says, what? He says that, did you know that the United States has the highest prison, what was it? Incarceration per capita, right? He says legitimate concerns in the United States as if there were lies. Because in the way that this conversation is structured is that Franco is saying the same truth, right? He's saying something that is correct about North Korea, that he has finally seen through the veil of being manipulated by Kim Jong-un, and seeing the reality for what it is. He says statistics, he says facts about North Korea. And then Kim Jong-un is portrayed on the other side, saying as, well, the United States has done these, but the viewer is supposed to take that as if Kim Jong-un is just lying. He's a master manipulator. He's saying things in a way that's gonna that aren't true, right? It's set up to say that those legitimate concerns that you hear aren't actually true. Those are just ravings of a madman in another country. And so the truth about the United States, the highest incarceration per capita, is just whitewash. It just says, well, no, in response or in comparison to Franco, who's seen as the holder of truth at this point, because he is now liberating himself from the lie that has been fed. Because the way that Franco is developed as a character, and this is very interesting in that he first really likes Kim Jong-un. He's like, he's a good guy, he knows how to play hoops, he sleeps with a lot of women, he can drink, he can smoke, he can do all these things. Why don't you like him? Seth or Rogan. And Rogan comes in as the voice of reason, saying like he's madman, he's killed millions of people. He starves them, he does all these things against a whole group of people. And then Franco's like, oh no, what are you talking about? So what this means in the long run, people who did watch this, is that supporters of North Korea, supporters of people who are the enemy of the state here in the United States, are going to be perceived as lunatics, people who would just give in to a fantasy that's fed by someone else. And so the legitimate concerns that people put up against imperialism, against North Korea, against racism, are just seen as lies. And that's pretty interesting, because in the long run, that's going to affect how people perceive the conversations are going on. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, for the starving thing, why don't you feed your people? You've heard these arguments before, right? Like, oh, North Korea doesn't feed its people and spends all its money on nuclear programs that are just dangerous. But we gotta remember why they spend it on nuclear weapons. Like, what is the usual answer? Oh, because they want to threaten the world for food aid. And they're using it as like blackmail kind of thing, right? Well, that's actually not true, because they've even stated themselves. They're not saying, we'll stop our nuclear program if you give us food. Like, no. What they're saying is, we spent all this effort and time to build our nuclear program so that we can deter the United States, who has been like for 50 freaking years, like threatening our country with sanctions. As soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, they sanctioned our country with all these things so that we can't trade with anybody. We've suffered all these natural disasters, and at that time, immediately, the United States said, oh, sanctions again. Make it even harder. And then they're seeing countries around the world being attacked by the United States because these countries are weak. They don't have nuclear programs. They have armies, but then they're very, not very modernized. So the United States just walks all over them. North Korea says, what can we do to make sure that the United States won't attack us while we're trying to rebuild our economy after our trading partners have collapsed and our economy is kind of in shambles. It was in shambles. There was a famine in the early 90s from the late 90s to the early 2000s. There was, up until 1998. But then that ended, and they continued building a nuclear program so that they can ensure that they can continue rebuilding and providing more homes and rebuilding their agricultural sector and all that stuff. They have the nukes so that the United States won't attack them. It's a nuclear deterrent. That's what they say. And it's true. Like, has North Korea been attacked by the United States? Have they invaded them? No. Did they invade Iraq? Did they have nuclear weapons? No, but they invaded it. Did they destroy Libya? Did they have nukes? No. And yes, they did destroy Libya. Are they funding terrorists to go to Syria and try to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad? Yes, they are. You know? Does they have nukes? No. So they have, like, the Syrians, Libyans, Iraqi, they can't mess with the United States, and the U.S. can do whatever they want to them because the United States has the upper hand of being like a huge economic superpower and military superpower with nuclear weapons, with nobody else that they're attacking. Like, it's not on equal footing. But North Korea's brought themselves up on equal footing with the United States, and it was like very necessary, right? Like, if you're in a war, would you, like, and you're a soldier and you lost your gun or something, would you try to find your gun first, or would you try to find food? Or find new socks because your socks are a little uncomfortable? Like, I don't know. Like, they're very practical. Like, we need to secure our defense before we do anything else. Otherwise, we will have nothing to, we'll have no country to save. You know what I mean? So, some arguments that, really good arguments that I read about, you know, when people accuse North Korea of starving its own people, is that, let's see. Okay, so it had natural disasters, their trading partners gone, I said that before, and can you blame that on the North Koreans for starving? No, like, did people blame the United States president for starving its own people during the Great Depression? Or when there was that great Dust Bowl nonsense in the United States history, or the 2007-2008 financial crash? They don't blame on individuals, say, oh, they're intentionally taking away our homes. They're intentionally starving us. They're intentionally, you know, firing us from above. Like, that's not it. It's like if all U.S. crops were destroyed in a huge, like, natural disasters, and then on top of that, they're not allowed to trade with the outside world to get food, to kind of like relieve its population while they're trying to rebuild, right? Also, there are pictures of a guy who was anti-North Korea, and he's like, I'm gonna go be this, you know, ambitious journalist or photographer, go to North Korea and take pictures of the truth, because all this propaganda about them being happy people is false. So I'm going to go there and take pictures of this country to prove to people that they are starving, they are miserable, and it's not a happy country at all. But then when he actually went there, he found out that what he was saying is not true. So these are pictures of the guy, and he went in there and he's very surprised to see images of North Korea that's actually a very happy country. And they're not, like, there's no starving people dying on the streets. This is a photographer. You know? It's a very beautiful country. People are living their lives normally, although, you know, still a hard situation because they're living under sanctions. You know? But it's not a destitute, impoverished, like, hellhole like they try to paint North Korea as. I mean, there's still people living their lives, you know, as happily as any other people. They still have a nice country, you know. Oh, this is really interesting. They pour gasoline on clams and then they burn it until it goes out and they eat it.
So this, I mean, these pictures are pictures in and of themselves, right? But we have conceptions that affect that, right? I mean, if you see this or this, you know, what are you going to think automatically? If you don't know where it's from, you know, once you add that into North Korea, these ideas of oppression, these ideas of destitute, of being starving, kind of just come up in the mind. And that's because that's part of the culture that we've been grown up in, right? The bourgeoisie, the ruling class here in the United States, has created media and education, and it has influenced our ideas of what North Korea is. You know? And so when we see images, when this photographer is saying, I'm going to take the pictures of the truth, with my lens, because that is the truth right there. But if you come in with a certain perspective, then it's going to be influencing how you see that, right? And so, seeing this video, right? I don't know what acting's doing, but these are people.
This is from 2013 from a Japanese news media company, and they just went to North Korea called Kyoto News, and they took images of North Korea and filmed it, and you can actually listen to it if you want. And this is like the new apartments that they built recently by the workers, so that they could be housed for free. They could house university professors, scientists, and other workers as well. And they're provided free of charge to the workers and anybody else that gets assigned the apartments. And in the movie, they try to portray the grocery stores as just being painted on a wall and with some fake fruits on the edge to make it look like a real thing, but it's actually fake. But then they actually do have a grocery store.
Yeah, it's not a wall or a mural of the food.
Yeah.
And that just reinforces the idea that it's just, they're lying. There's no way that they can be prosperous in such a country.
And the reason that they go to such lengths to prove that they have freaking grocery stores of all things, or that they actually have phones, is because Western, anti-North Korean, right-wing newspapers and sites, they go to North Korea, they take pictures of the most innocent things, like just someone sleeping on a bench or hanging out. People there's programs in the communities, cities, villages, towns, everywhere, where they have a shortage of fuel. So what do? When their lawns get overgrown, or their public areas get overgrown with weeds and stuff. Well, let's go out there, volunteer, and let's pull the weeds ourselves by hand, put them in a bag, right? They take pictures of this and they say, oh, that's a homeless person sleeping on a bench and they're starving to death. Oh, they're eating the grass in grass soup or something. No proof at all. And this is what North Korea actually is. And nobody, everybody just takes it as truth, the nonsense that they hear. No, apparently this is plastic, but no. And they say, oh, they don't have any shops. They have this failed socialist system that doesn't work. But they still have stores. It's not exclusive to capitalism for stores or whatever. They have lights, it's not dark all the time. But another thing is, they have a public distribution system, right? Where food is provided for free of charge to the North Korean people. At least we call them rations, but then they just give them a guaranteed amount of food so that they don't starve to death, right? Obviously. And then if they want to buy more, because we all want to eat more sometimes, just like a power meal is not enough, they can use their wages from work, go to the supermarket and buy more food, right? Oh, I got a ration of soy sauce and a bag of rice and this and that, and some meats and here and there, vegetables, but I want to make something else and I want more food. I want instant ramen, sometimes I can't cook. Just go to the store and buy it. We're not going to give you every single last thing that's your request, but you can get it. You earn money for a reason, right? Get more stuff. And people keep bringing up images from the 1990s as saying this is 2014 North Korea. It's I'll go take a picture from the library from 1920s era or 1930s era of the Great Depression in the United States and say, wow, look at the poor, starving people in America, even in 2015. Look at that. Okay. Well, real quick, does anybody have any questions about any other accusations that you might have heard? Yes.
I don't really have an agenda about it, but I know that a lot of people have said in various capacities that the capital city counting is this great city of quote unquote capitalism, and then everything outside of that is basically slums. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
That's actually not true. Well, I mean, they do try to make their it's their capital city, they wanna make it look nice, right? It's where their head of government stays and like all their main things are, because it's the capital. But, you know, all the other cities get an equal amount of kind of care, and the communities, like the workers within those cities, like all volunteer to keep it, maintained, and, they have nice things too, you know, like they have, like, yeah, it's not a showcase capital, you know, like North Korea's capital, Pyongyang, is a little bigger, I guess, it's the biggest city, but then all the other towns are like, it's like saying, oh, Washington DC is a showcase capital, and everything outside of Washington DC is just shit, you know, like, oh, we got Los Angeles over here, well, they got big cities all over North Korea too, you know, I mean, we got images. Thought I had images set up, but I'll show you later. But yeah, it's not some like Potemkin village where they try to like say, oh, just come here and don't go anywhere else. Like people who are allowed to go to North Korea, by the way, and Mr. Rowe will talk about it in a second. Yeah, like now they're starting to get a little bit more opened up, and you can visit all over North Korea, not just the capital. And people can come back and say, wow, it's actually not that different from Pyongyang. Pyongyang might be a little bigger, but all the other cities have an equal amount of kind of like goods and buildings and all that good stuff. So it's not